Peterman was telling us earlier there that there is a determination there that they will not take this lying down. Just how far the Morsy supporters are prepared to go to support their, well, I don't know if it still is a government at the moment. We're all waiting to hear from the military. The Egyptian president, which he still is at the moment, Mohamed Morsy, apparently is in a barracks across from the presidential palace, a Republican Guard barracks, and we heard from Reuters that barricades above barbed wire are being put up around that barracks. Why, we don't know, we have to say. This is all coming after the Egyptian president said in a Facebook posting of all things that he was prepared to have a coalition government put in place to placate the people and adhere to the wishes of the people on the streets and have parliamentary elections in a few months. Well, it doesn't seem to have been enough given what we see going on now. The Egyptian president, according to the state-run Al Aram newspaper, no longer part of the decision-making circle. And they're quoting a senior official source there. And just a quote from the newspaper again, the president is no longer able to make any political decisions now, and a decision has been taken to prevent leaders loyal to the current regime from travelling overseas until the General Command of the Armed Forces are finished formulating their expected statement. Now, again, that coming from the state-run Al Aram newspaper, citing a senior official source. Reza Sayer is there witnessing what you see on your left of your screen there, and you see now on the right of your screen, and that is that massive crowd. Reza, these developments, what we're seeing in the Al Aram newspaper are seeming to point to it being game over for the president.
And Michael, that's why the tens of thousands of people behind me are celebrating. Many of them are still chanting, "Leave, leave, leave." But it looks like they may not have to chant that anymore. There's all sorts of signals that President Morsy has been pushed from power, and these opposition factions, the critics of President Morsy, have reached their goal. I think it's important to point out that how effective this campaign was to push Morsy from power. It started 3 months ago with a petition drive, calling for President Morsy to step aside, calling for new elections. The campaign went around Egypt gathering signatures. By Sunday, they said they'd gathered 22 million signatures. If indeed that's the case, it's 9 million more than what President Morsy received votes winning the presidency last year. Their message was, President Morsy, more people want you out than they want you in. And it looks like they've reached their goal of pushing aside President Morsy from power, although it wasn't exactly through classic democratic channels, but it was certainly people power that we're seeing today, Michael.
And of course, at the end of the day, as it always has in Egypt, the army will look after itself, but it's running a pretty tight balancing act here, aren't they? I mean, the notion of removing this government, we don't know what it will be replaced with ahead of, presumably, elections. There are inherent risks, one imagines.
There's no question about it, and I think look for the armed forces to make this transition much quicker than the previous transition. Remember, after the 2011 revolution, they were in power for a year and a half. It was a difficult and turbulent year and a half for the military, and there was all sorts of signs that they didn't want to govern. They had trouble governing, and it was widely believed that last August, President Morsy and this government reached an agreement with the armed forces, that they would step aside from domestic politics, and in return, this government led by President Morsy would not interfere with their secret and independent budget. They would not interfere with their gigantic economic empire and enterprise. Obviously, that agreement is no more. It has been bucked by the armed forces stepping into this conflict.
Reza, do stand by. I want to go to Becky Anderson, who's also there in Cairo with you, and also just saying that the US State Department is saying that the situation in Egypt remains fluid, cannot confirm whether a military coup is underway. Just want to mention that in coming to you, Becky.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And this is special coverage, of course, of what is going on here with what can only be described as a watershed moment in Egyptian politics and for the lives of the more than 80 million Egyptians who really are playing a waiting game at this point. The military gave the government here a deadline which passed about 2 hours ago to get their act together, to include more in their politics or to step down. That deadline has expired, and at this point we are waiting for a statement from the military as to what they intend to do next. You can see on our screen that we are quoting the news agency Reuters in saying that President Morsy is likely now at the Republican Guard barracks, and if you speak to anybody in the know here, they'll tell you that is absolutely correct. That is the most likely place for him to be, and if you were to describe it as a house arrest at this stage, well, that is also pretty much the way that people would describe it. So it sounds as if President Morsy at this stage, though unconfirmed, is under house arrest at the Republican Guard barracks. Michael, the military's Apache helicopters have been around here about 50, 60, 70 sort of meters above the square this evening and received with huge cheers of jubilation. And it does, as we were discussing earlier, seem quite remarkable that a military that was sent back to its barracks effectively by the people of Egypt, fed up with the idea of them intervening for too long after the end of Hosni Mubarak, now seems like the likely only alternative going forward. I've got Hisham Kassam, the former publisher and civil libertarian, still a civil libertarian, of course, and political analyst with me now. Firstly, let's talk about President Morsy, likely to be under house arrest now at the Republican Guard barracks, correct?
I think President Morsy effectively is no longer running the country. The news is all streamlining that he's more or less under house arrest. He's only allowed to contact 8 people. The Prime Minister, Minister of Defense, Minister of Interior, Director of the Intelligence. The 3 of those are on one side against him, and then the others are his advisors.
So they are now managing his message, which they didn't do late last night when he made a statement to the people of Egypt, long in rhetoric, short in specifics. It was a long speech of 45 minutes,
yes,
in which he was absolutely defiant and said he was digging in effectively.
Certainly. They could have prevented that message yesterday because they knew what the message was about and they knew that he had refused the ultimatum they gave him. But they decided to let him, they more or less wanted to expose him. They knew he was going to offend most of the people on the street. He was going to dig his heels in. And so they thought, let him do it. We don't want him to claim he's a victim of free censorship.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, as you say, he was effectively winding up many of the people on the street. And, you can see how effectively decisions are being made on the street about what happens next so far as the sort of sense of civil disobedience is concerned. He was also talking to his own constituency. Of course, how big is that constituency these days? Because we see people at pro-Morsy rallies. I mean, there are thousands of them.
Okay, there's one big rally in Cairo. It's nowhere near as big as this, as opposed to tens of big rallies in Cairo and then across the country. He does have smaller rallies, but they're beginning to shy away. They feel vulnerable. There's so much frustration with Morsy and the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamists on the whole that it's becoming a little dangerous for them to make a show. I think yesterday was his final bluff. He was trying to give the impression, we are there in numbers and we are going to retaliate. We're not going to allow this to happen. However, with almost 24 hours since his message, it's clear his supporters will not dare challenge the crowds on the street.
Is this a military coup in all but name at this point?
Certainly not. I mean, you see the numbers out there. We're talking 10 to 15 million. We're talking 22 million signatures gathered saying we do not want Morsy. And then eventually, with the frustration and the fact that he was ignoring court rulings, ignoring petitions, everything, people took to the streets and disaster started looming. The military had to intervene. Otherwise, this crowd was going to go get Morsy from his palace.
So what happens next? We are awaiting this statement from the military. What do you expect them to say?
I expect them to speak about a roadmap for a transition. I'm not sure how they will word the fact that Morsy is no longer the president. They might do it politely, diplomatically, but
they'll make it clear.
They will make it clear. And set a time frame for new elections. They did invite his party to join the parties who are now meeting with the General Sisi, the Minister of Defense. But they did not invite the Muslim Brotherhood because, again, it's like only political parties can be represented.
So this is the Justice and Freedom Party that was invited,
Exactly.
which is the political wing, effectively, of the Muslim Brotherhood movement.
Yes, but then again, a lot of people have been complaining about the Muslim Brotherhood and the Freedom and Justice Party saying one only, so the invitation went to them. They declined it. It could have been a terrible mistake they made, because today, whatever agreement happens is going to be more or less outline the roadmap.
It took 80 years for the Muslim Brotherhood to get a foothold here in Egypt. Are you telling me tonight it's effectively the end of their political influence?
Certainly, yes. I mean, they've tried. They made the same mistake which has kept them out of power for 80 years. They bite more than they can chew. They go for the overwin. And Morsy's victory into the presidency was very slim. It's a long story, but it was really thin. And instead of inclusive politics, he monopolizes politics and pushes everybody out, and the result is this.
And this is tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people below us here, Michael, in Tahrir Square. The green lights you see are lights that people are pointing on buildings, on the river. I mean, let me be clear, it is a sense of jubilation, certainly no sense of violence by any stretch of the imagination in this square this evening. A real sense of jubilation as these people and the rest of Egypt awaits this statement from the military here as to where Egypt is headed next. Michael?
Becky Anderson, thanks. And let's take you now to somewhere where there is less of a sense of jubilation. Ben Weedham.